Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy. Today we're looking at this. It's the second coming of sorts of Sigma's 35mm f1.4 ART series lens. This is the DG DN version for Sony E-mount, L-mount, and possibly other mounts. I don't know when you might be watching this, but maybe Nikon and Canon have loosened things up a little bit. I don't know. When I say second coming, well, the original 35mm f1.4 DG HSM was the first art lens, and it kicked off this whole thing. And this particular lens is now its successor. Almost 10 years later, we have what turns out to be a pretty decent lens, all things considered. So it's got some shoes to fill as well, and I'm sure it's capable of that, but let's take a quick look. We've got a really nice, large, nicely dampened manual focus ring. Unfortunately, we're all into electronic focusing now, the way most mirrorless lenses have done away with that manual coupling. That's just kind of how we have to do things, but it is nice and smooth. We've got an aperture ring, physical aperture ring. I like them, some people don't. You get those satisfying clicks. Ooh, oh yeah. Or you can put it in a setting that you can then just control it through the camera. Very thoughtfully, Sigma provides a switch that will lock it in that mode, so you don't have to ever worry about bumping the aperture ring and putting it into one side or the other. We also do have a declickable aperture here. So if you are the type that does some video and you want a nice smooth aperture, then you can do that. And that lock that I mentioned locks it in the manual range as well, so you don't have to worry about it going back to camera control all of a sudden. Besides that, we've got one customizable button and an autofocus manual focus switch. And I mean, what else do you want? Here on the back, we've got a very slight rubber gasket to keep dust and moisture out of your camera. I don't know for sure about the whole rest of the lens. I guess I could have Googled it, but so could you if you're really interested. I didn't mean that to come off as shade, but here we have a pedal-shaped hood. It's got that rubberized grip around the edge with a button to release it. And that sound you heard was the lens cap coming loose as I dragged the hood across it. Here we have a 67mm filter thread. So actually pretty affordable as far as filters go. 67 is pretty common size as well, so you might already have any filters you might need. That being said, there's not really any filters that you could, would, or should put on there for astrophotography. Minus maybe, I'm not 100% on this, but I did get a marketing email from Kolari Vision saying that they're partnered with IDAS, so you might be able to get some type of front filter for, let's say, hydrogen alpha or something like that. Interesting. So maybe I'll have to amend my spiel, but yeah, there. That being said, I don't know. I didn't test it. Like I said, Google it. So what we have here is a fairly dense lens. It feels nice in the hand, well built, lots of metal, lots of glass in here, obviously, and I'm really hoping it is good. But let's find out. Let's pop in a Lightroom. Hey folks, welcome to Lightroom. Here we've got a bunch of samples from the Sigma 35mm f1.4 DG DN ART. Essentially the second coming of their 35mm f1.4 lens after their whole ART series kickoff with the original back in 2012. Here we can see that this lens was released, or at least announced, or however it is, in 2021. These little numbers on the Sigma lenses correspond to the date that the lens came out. So here, 7 samples. These are all tracked samples. These are all tracked samples shot with the Sony a7R Mark V. They're 60-second samples, and that's because I forgot to shoot non-tracked samples with this lens. Full disclosure. That being said, from all the other 35mm lenses I've shot with, you can more than likely shoot this one on a tripod. Let's say 15-second exposures. What's my usual? ISO 500 with a 50 megapixel camera and get acceptable results with minimal star trailing. So, sorry, here, I'm human. What are you going to do? These samples were all tracked as they typically are with the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II portable star tracker. Fervent Astronomy is Fornax's North American distributor. So if you are interested in just the strongest little mount that could, by all means, head on over to ferventastronomy.com. You can learn more there. Here, my usual spiel is to tell you about ISO invariants. If you want to know more about ISO invariants, and if you want some more information and some samples, head to the description and there will be a link back to my website, and all of that will be waiting for you. Long story short, for this camera at ISO 320, if I shoot at ISO 320 and I shoot at any ISO above ISO 320, I get the same file. I get the same noise. I get the same detail in the shadows. However, I gain something by staying at the base ISO on this ISO invariant camera, and that is I retain more detail in the highlights. Now, it's space. You might say, Darren, there are no highlights. Well, dear viewer, there are. The stars are highlights. You can get galaxy cores that are highlights, bright nebulae. These are all areas where you might blow out the core or blow out the highlight and then not be able to recover that information, and then maybe you have to blend multiple exposures and it's a big pain in the butt. So what's a solution? Well, it's not perfect, but you can shoot at the base ISO or whatever the nearest base ISO is, and you can get the same dark and noise performance as higher ISOs while retaining more highlight information. So that's why I do it. Go to that link, read more if you need more of an explanation. Okay, so I mentioned these samples are going to be available. Please click the link, download them, pixel peep, process them, hang them on your fridge. But, dear viewer, please respect my copyright. These, I know, are not great works of art, but I did put a lot of legwork into getting them, and that is something that I'm hoping that you can respect. So please don't misrepresent these as your own. Please don't distribute them online or elsewhere. Please don't use them as the basis for your own reviews. Please use them in the context in which I am providing them, which is personal consumers' assessment of the lens's performance to see if it's a lens that they want to buy. Thank you for listening to my spiel. All right, so 7 samples. We're mostly going to look at the 1.4 sample because why buy a 1.4 lens to shoot it at, f2.8, for instance? So I know a lot of you are going to be interested in that. So let's just jump right in. First things first, space junk. Satellite aside, there is some vignetting. You can see it pretty well in the navigator. The edges and corners here are fairly dark. Got a brighter patch in the middle. This is pretty typical. Lenses are roundish, curved things, or made up of roundish, curved things, and that tends to lead to roundish, curved things like vignetting. And that tends to have some effects on how they're able to do their job. And it just so happens that they can transmit light better through the center than they can at the edges. Fact of life. That being said, this is a 60-second exposure at f1.4. I'm pretty confident we're going to have some information in the corners that we can recover. We won't worry about that. One thing that you can sometimes see is a contrast difference here, and it's maybe the case. I'm just going to flip back and forth. Here we go, 1.6 and 1.4. This little extra brightness we get at 1.4 might be a bit of exposure, but it might be not all landing where it needs to. It might be fuzzing things out, getting a little bit of lack of contrast, but I don't think it's a big deal, all things considered. One thing that I'm willing to bet, just based on the fact that it kind of looks like there's little blue dots, is that there is going to be chromatic aberration. And wouldn't you know it, there is. So here we can see this blue fringing, that's chromatic aberration. The lens is having a bit of trouble getting that blue color into the center point of the star, and it kind of gets spread out and spread around. There's a little bit more of a purpley on this limb of the star, and if you go out this way, you can definitely see that there's a bit of a break here. The star's got bluer cyan on the back, purple on the front, along a radius that, wouldn't you know it, goes from the center of the frame to the edges, which is quite common. Speaking of that radius, we're going to jump into the corner here, and we're going to see what the corners are like. Now, they're quite dark here, so we'll come over here, and here's a good example. This is astigmatism. This is not coma. I know it gets tossed around on the internet a lot. This is not coma. This is astigmatism. This is 2 different types of astigmatism, in fact. You've got tangential astigmatism, which is, as we mentioned, going on a radius from the center to the edges. So what's happening is the star is getting stretched out along that radius because the lens can't effectively focus it into a pinpoint. And then you'll notice these little blue wings, that's sagittal astigmatism. It often occurs or always occurs at a right angle to tangential. Sometimes they look like they swoop back or swoop forward or curved a little bit, but they're always, at the end of the day, at a right angle to that tangential astigmatism. You can imagine in a axis that, I guess it's not an axis, but kind of ringing the frame, they'll always be pointed at a right angle. So that's, again, the lens having trouble focusing that light in the middle there. And in a lot of cases, it can cause stars to look bigger than they otherwise would. In this case, I'm just going to move down to the edge here. It's not actually doing that bad of a job. It's not affecting the star's shapes when viewed at a normal viewing distance, at least not to my eye. Sure, once you zoom in at 400%, it looks wonky, but zoomed out, it's not enough of a problem, I think, to really make things noticeable. So this can actually become a problem when it makes the stars around the corners and edges really look big compared to the more well-resolved stars in the center where they're a little bit smaller. So that is something that can and does happen with certain lenses. But for this particular lens, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, to be honest. So I'm personally not worrying about it. Mind you, I'm not you. If you want to have anxiety about it, it's all up to you. Anyway, so we come here. One thing I usually mention is spherical aberrations, and I don't really think there's anything to worry about here. Again, curved glass elements focusing light onto a flat plane can be tough. Most lenses are aspherical. They're built to correct for this, but with stars you can still get like a little bit of bloating, and it does interact with chromatic aberration a little bit to make the stars look bigger than they otherwise would. So if this lens was perfect, I don't think we'd be getting quite as big of a star rendering in these cases. Let's find a bigger, here we go. Here's an example. Got like a little bit of loss of contrast. It kind of looks like it's shining on this area, right? But that said, it's not really that extreme. Like it's not really noticeable unless you're coming in here doing this at 400%. So I don't think that's a big issue. So cross spherical aberrations off your worry list. Next thing, we mentioned the astigmatism and coma. So this is not coma, this is astigmatism. Again, astigmatism. I'm not seeing coma in this lens because what coma actually is when a star will get a bright fuzzy tail either pointed towards the center or pointed towards the edges of the frame, again, along an axis from the center to the edges of the frame. That tail will usually make the star look like a wedge to some respect, and you can see here this kind of loss of contrast that we see on both sides. Imagine if the star was just kind of taking a pizza shape out of that. Then I would say that's coma, and you'll see it on all kinds of stars. The brighter, the more it'll show up. But here, I'm seeing astigmatism, not a lot of coma. So coma is actually chromatic aberration, and it's thus named because of comet tails, which are called coma. So that is what that actually is. But I'm not really seeing it here, which is nothing to worry about. Next thing, in the center, we'll take a little look at the stars, and then we're going to jump to the edge. And they look about the same size. And obviously, it's a bit darker here, so we're losing some of them. But even though they've got a little bit of those astigmatism effects happening, when we jump, generally the stars are staying the same, not shape, but size. And that indicates that I don't think this lens is really suffering from field curvature. What's field curvature? Well, again, curved things, lensing light onto flat things, they can actually do that at different distances. So you can have a case where the center of the lens is in focus, but the edges and corners are out of focus. And if you were to focus for the corners, the center would be out of focus because they're focusing at different planes. But that's not what's happening here. I think you're pretty good as far as field curvature. So this lens is quote unquote a little bit, could be considered more flat, although there are likely some distortions, but at least we're focusing at the right plane. Now, before we go look at those distortions in the develop module, we're just going to flip through the exposures here and see what happens. So this is F1.4, 1.6. You can see there's, in the center here, a definite resolution of that little bright spot. So, and if you look at the histogram, we are losing some exposure going to 1.6. but you know, it's almost evening things out a little bit. It might not technically be a bad thing in the grand scheme. So 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, again, things are evening out across the frame a bit. F2, 2.2, 2.5, 2.8, super dark. I don't know why you would buy this lens and then shoot it at f2.8. I probably say that every time I review a lens, but save your money and buy an f2.8 lens or an f2 lens or an f1.8 lens. In this case, I think this lens is perfectly usable at 1.4 when viewed from normal viewing distances, maybe even more usable here at 1.6. Once we're getting to 1.8, maybe it's saving you like an extra two minutes in Photoshop or something, but I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. Or 2 seconds, we'll find out once we look at the profile corrections. That being said, this is viewed zoomed out. Let's see what happens when we zoom in. So here we are, center of the frame. Let's see what happens as we stop down. So this is f1.4, f1.6. Well, okay. So are you seeing what I'm seeing? Blue, purple, blue, purple, blue, purple, blue, purple. Okay, so I do think that there's some loss of contrast here at f1.4 versus even just 1.6. And we can see that there is causing some star bloat that's not happening at f1.6. And it's changing the color of the stars pretty aggressively, which is interesting. I don't remember encountering this before. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't think the white balance has changed at all. Huh, okay. So far, I'm leaning towards an f1.6 on this one. So anyway, 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, 2, 2.2, 2.5, 2.8. Yeah, now, yikes. Okay, that's interesting. I guess it's the first time of everything. What I find kind of curious is this all almost seems like a more correct color. The yellows are a little bit more yellow and there's less purple. Stars aren't purple, but lenses do affect things. So this is obvious. Now this is just an aside, but each of these exposures are 1 minute. So this is 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute, 5, 6, 7 minutes. 7 minutes and star hasn't really moved at all. Maybe a teeny little bit. So LighTrack II is doing a good job. That's your second LighTrack II plug for this video. What is going on here? Let's check it out. So develop module, take a look. So here's the color temperature as shot. Yeah, the temperature and tint are identical. So this is coming from the lens. That's very interesting. Okay, well, we're gonna do double duty here. So let's remove chromatic aberration. Of course, nothing happened because it hardly ever does. Click the defringe button. Not really getting anywhere with this blue. Yeah. Okay, we'll reset that. Let's just see the f1.6. Okay, f1.6, we've managed to correct that chromatic aberration. That's one more tick in the 1.6 column. Let's zoom out here. We're gonna go back to this 1.4 image. We're gonna enable profile corrections. All right, so we got a couple of things happening. We are cleaning up a lot of that vignetting, which I like to see. Nice and easy. If you look at the navigator, it does look pretty even now. Keep in mind, these are much darker here than the Milky Way corner would be. So I think this is actually pretty accurate. The other thing that you might notice is that there's some geometry. So here we've got some barrel distortion. The center of the frame is essentially warped towards the viewer and the edges are warped away from the viewer. So when we correct that, it flattens the center out away from the viewer and pulls the edges towards the viewer to give a more true to life representation here. So that is pretty good. You'll notice on the edges, top and bottom, you're not losing any focal length basically, or any field of view. Stars are staying put. You are losing a little bit in the corners and the edge, the short edges there. In some cases, not an insignificant amount. You can watch the star just disappears off the edge. If we zoom out, scale down here, you can see the exact method by which this is happening. So here we can see it's getting transformed out this way, although this edge is staying flat, so it's just kind of stretching it out, stretching the corners up. And overall, we're not losing too much of the information that we got here, so I don't think that's a big deal. The thing that I do think makes a difference here is the F1.4, F1.6. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see if we can give these fringes another shot here with the 1.4. Where's the little dropper? These ones look a little bit more, I would say, quote unquote, normal colored. So, okay, so here the darker blue or the purpley, we can clean up a little bit. But this blue, this cyan, is just no dice. So that's not too bad. I'm just gonna flip back and forth, 1.4, 1.6. You can tell the 1.4 has a satellite through it. So yeah, it cleans most of it up. We still got a little bit of that because I believe we're getting that teeny bit of spherical distortion or just contrast loss that we're not getting with the 1.6 shot. So, you know, for the little bit of extra exposure, I don't know if it's, you know what, it's going to be a personal choice. Yeah. If you're willing to deal with some of the little quirks, go 1.4, 1.6. If you just want a little bit less work and a cleaner shot, I mean, it's just a fraction of a stop. It's not a huge deal. So you're not going to really make or break an image doing that, but it definitely helps to have that 1.6. Let's pop back out to talking head me and wrap this up. So what'd you think? You know, a 35mm fast aperture lens like this can be useful for Milky Way photography and different kinds of nightscape photography. And certainly, I think this one has its place. I think it fits in nicely considering its performance, its price point, and its fast aperture. But that's just my opinion. I'm doing this and providing samples so that you can make the decision for yourself depending on your particular wants and needs. And I hope this has been useful. Yeah, is this the lens for you? Could be. I'm at least pleased that Sigma has given that first art series lens a worthy successor. So for that, I'm happy, but hopefully you find what you need out of this review. Anyway, I'm Darren. This is Fervent Astronomy. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.